do, please put your hands together for our moderator for the second session, Tuan Syed Nabil Al-Jafri.
Thank you. Thank you, Master of Ceremonies, for that elaborate introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone has had a good lunch and back for more informative session with our distinguished panel of speakers here. As said by the Master of Ceremonies, my name is Syed Nabil and I'm from the Malaysian Association of ASEAN Young Entrepreneurs. Well, today, this afternoon, firstly, I'm sitting in as a replacement for Datuk Supramaniam, who at the very last minute had to make a trip overseas. So unfortunately, he's not able to be with us here today. But nonetheless, it is a privilege for me to be here to moderate a panel of very distinguished and well-known speakers. Without further ado, let me first introduce to my immediate left, a very prominent figure in ASEAN, Tan Sri Dr. Munir Majid, who is the chairman of Bank Muamalat, Financial Services Professional Board, chairman of ASEAN Bank Malaysia, chairman of CIMB ASEAN Research Institute, as well as the president of the ASEAN Business Club. Further to that, he also sits on the board of ISIS and the Financial Services Talent Council of Bank Negara Malaysia. Corporately, he has also had extensive experience being the group editor of New Straits Times, our main publication here in Malaysia. He was the first chairman of CIMB Bank and also the founding chairman of our Securities Commission. So further to that, he's also a former non-executive independent director of Telecom, as well as the non-executive chairman of our national airline, which is the Malaysia Airlines. He's the founder president of Kuala Lumpur Business Club and also a member of the Court of Fellows of the Malaysian Institute of Management. Now his education, as you'd be interested to know, he is a fellow at the Southeast Asia Center of Strategic Studies and Southeast Asian Studies for LSE, where he also did his bachelor degree and PhD in international relations. Currently, he is the honorary fellow and visiting senior fellow of Center of International Affairs, Diplomacy and Strategy of LSE. That is Tan Sri Munir. Big round of applause for Tan Sri Munir, please. To his immediate left is Mr. Ashwin Tekajaranyovikul, the Chief Executive Officer and President of Burley Jaka Company Limited, Thailand. Mr. Ashwin only just arrived here from Bangkok, and he'll be flying out shortly after this session. So it's a real pleasure to have him here. A little bit about Mr. Ashwin. He has extensive financial and business development background and has been the Chief Executive Officer of Big C Supercenter since 2016. At Burley Jaka PCL, prior to being promoted to the position of the President of the company in 2008 and subsequently Chief Executive Officer in 2012, he worked as Executive Vice President in Business Development and Finance Divisions, running the company's new business development initiatives and finance operations. Education-wise, Mr. Ashwin holds a Master of Public Administration from Harvard University, a Master's of Business Administration from Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and a Bachelor of Engineering from Chulalongkorn University in Thailand. So a round of applause for Mr. Ashwin, who's here with us just for this afternoon. And last, and most certainly not least, we have furthest to the left is Dr. Victor Gao, the Chairman of China Energy Security Institute and Vice Chairman of Sino-Europe United Investment Corporation. Just a brief introduction for Dr. Gao. He is the Chairman of as mentioned earlier, China Energy Security Institute and Vice Chairman of Sino-Europe United Investment Corporation. He is also a current affairs commentator with CCTV News. He has extensive working experience in diplomacy, law, securities regulation, investment banking, private equity, corporate management, and charity. He was an interpreter for Deng Xiaoping and other Chinese leaders in the 1980s and worked with the Chinese Foreign Ministry, the UN Secretariat, and the Securities and Futures Commission of Hong Kong. He held senior positions with Morgan Stanley, China International Capital Corporation, Daiwa Securities, PCCW, Henderson Group, and CNOOC Limited. He holds advisory and board positions with major institutions including Saudi Aramco, MasterCard, and Kwanzi Media in Hong Kong. Dr. Gao holds a JD from Yale Law School and a Master's in Political Science from Yale Graduate School, and a Master's in English Literature from Beijing University of Foreign Studies, and a Bachelor's in English Literature from Suzhou University. He is a licensed attorney at law in the state of New York. So last but not least, obviously, Dr. Gao. A round of applause for all the distinguished panelists we have here today, this afternoon. So, Tan Sri, Mr. Ashwin, Dr. Gao, I have been told that this is the highlight of the forum this afternoon, so we can be a bit lax in terms of the time. We have about 1.5 hours. If it's okay, I would like to suggest maybe 20 minutes each for your presentation, after which we'll move on to the more interactive part of the session, which is the Q&A. Tan Sri, if it's okay with you, sir, it says here that your presentation will be on the private sector assessment of the AEC and what more needs to be done to make ASEAN a truly integrated economic region. If it's okay with you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Tan Syed Nabil. It's good to see you again. We were on the ASEAN Business Advisory Council together, and Nabil is now with the Young Entrepreneurs Council, the ASEAN. I think the introduction of the speakers took about half the time that we would have taken to speak. But let me start with this chart. I like this chart because it gives you a great idea of the prospects for ASEAN, the huge prospects for ASEAN. From, you're talking 1975, 2014, and then we're looking at the numbers for 2050, not earlier, by which time, when this happens, if this happens, ASEAN will be the 4th largest economy in the world at 9.2 trillion US dollars. But I always then qualify this huge prospect by saying that future prospect is not current reality. There are certain issues that need to be addressed to make this enormous opportunity realized. And I'd like to spend some time later on what are the kinds of issues or problems that could stand in the way of making these things realized. We always get large, high-level numbers on ASEAN, but I'd like to come down to some particular issues and perhaps some more strategic problems that ASEAN faces and must surmount if it wishes to fulfill its promise. I mean, if you look at the ASEAN, what's happening there? Go back to the map. I also like to show this this map, which is not coming up, is it? No. This after this, yeah. This is the Belt and Road Initiative, and I think the main point about this map is that the connectivity, not just within ASEAN, but from ASEAN, which is global in outlook, to the rest of the world, would be improved when, with the effectuation of the Belt and Road Initiative. Although, of course, the other point I usually like to make about this map is how the United States is not in it. You know, the whole of the Americas is not in it. I do not suggest that it is a particular motive of China's to keep the Americans out of the world or out of the New World, because I mean this map actually reflects a revival of the old Silk Road. And the old Silk Road, when those roads were constructed and all the navigational links were established, The Americas hadn't even been founded. So the Chinese are also saying to America, you know, you are late, or you're not on the map. But that's by the by. I'm sure the links with America will be forged. But insofar as the links across Europe, Central Asia, into Malaysia and ASEAN, the connectivity thing is working. You compare what Xi Jinping said in 2013, at the end of 2013, in Indonesia, about Belt and Road, and you compare with what Obama said in 2011 about the TPP, then you ask yourself, which has happened and which has not? And then therefore you're saying there's greater credibility in the Chinese expression of what they wish to do, because they have greater firepower, greater financial firepower to back up what they wish to do, and they have a political system that can ensure that they can do what they wish to do, unlike America, both on financial firepower as well as a political system, which actually paralyzed Obama, and now, of course, with the leader who has changed completely the multilateral approach, to trade links. But China has become very strong. We have particular problems in Malaysia about the surge of Chinese investments, about what it means to Malaysia, the economy, the balance sheet in terms of our liabilities or contingent liabilities. But if you recall, and many of you probably wouldn't be able to recall, the industrialization of Malaysia occurred primarily through Japanese investment. At the time Japanese investments first started, during the Tanaka regime, there was a lot of criticism of what Japan was doing. There were even riots in Indonesia against Tanaka, against the Japanese. You're taking over our country, taking over our jobs, the terms are not right, and so on and so forth. It is, if you reflect in the round, quite normal that people will be suspicious of new investments, suspicious of what they've done elsewhere in Africa, China, in Africa or Sri Lanka. The main point is we must make sure we protect our interests. That if we allow it, the Chinese will take the shirt off our back. Anyone would take the shirt off our back if we allowed it to happen. So we must make sure we are wary, but it does not mean that we turn our backs on these potential flows. And this is also happening. So coming back to those two slides, what would you say? You would say that the future looks good. You would say that ASEAN's potential is fantastic and looks like it's capable of being realized. Now, I'd like to bring to your attention what I had said earlier about what are the problems that may not make them realizable. Now, in terms of the growth numbers and achieving the size of 9.2 trillion by 2050, there are certain assumptions, okay? There are certain assumptions in that forecast. And those assumptions are, okay, the growth rate continues at 5.2%. Fine. Assuming that can happen and will continue, good. The second assumption is that the non-tariff measures in ASEAN would be reduced at least by 50%. Now, there's a lot of debate about what are non-tariff measures, what are non-tariff barriers. Okay. I use the term non-tariff measures to incorporate also the non-tariff barriers, and the measures, non-tariff measures, do not include barriers per se, but they could be regulations that are supposed to be protecting standards, that are supposed to be protecting countries against disease, for example. The phytosanitary non-tariff measures. Now, what are the numbers? In 2000, there were only a little over 1,000 non-tariff measures. In 2015, there was close to 6,000 non-tariff measures. That's when the ASEAN community was announced. Now, which means that these things have been coming up. Of course, people then the economists will quarrel. Oh, those are measures, they're not barriers. We must find the value, what's called the tariff value of a particular measure to see whether it inhibits trade and so on. But the fact of the matter is the numbers are very clear. They have increased. And the fact of the matter is the assumption about growth of the ASEAN economy requires 50% of NTMs to be reduced. Therefore, at ASEAN Back, we've been working very hard to try and get these things reduced. We've identified 4 sectors which should be prioritized to get them reduced. And we are working hard with the ASEAN Trade Facilitation Joint Consultative Committee, whose work is to go through all these things in great detail. It involves a lot of time, especially on de minimis rules and so on and so forth, talking to customs directors general of how to bring things down to achieve this reduction in non-tariff measures. Now the second assumption is, I know Ambassador Ong Keng Yong had mentioned that tariffs have been reduced. They have been reduced, but actual tariffs on average still remain at about 4.1%. Now this is better than the EU, where the tariffs were about 5.2%, despite the EU's long time existence. So ASEAN has improved, but it is assumed in those extrapolation of growth that the tariffs will be 0, despite the fact they're 4.1. So there's another thing that must be achieved to achieve those numbers. And the third assumption is that the cost of trade, doing trade within ASEAN, would be reduced by 20%, at least 20%, to achieve those numbers. So we've got to work very hard to ensure that things like the ASEAN single window, the things like the free flow of goods and services, that the cost of exporting, of importing, is brought down to achieve greater investment, higher growth. And therefore, these are 3 assumptions that must be fulfilled. Therefore, I say, future prospect is not current reality. We must fulfill those assumptions, must work hard to do so. Now, interestingly, also, the intervention of the digital economy, of digitization, as I call it, can cause some challenges to ASEAN assumptions about growth itself. For example, one of the assumptions of growth is that there will be investment into manufacturing, employment in ASEAN as a whole, because of the low cost of labor, particularly in Myanmar, Philippines, and Indonesia. Now, with robotization, robotized manufacturing, will the employment that is expected from labor at low cost in those 3 countries be fulfilled? Given that with robotization, you can produce more cheaply, faster, and also, of course, more efficiently. This can be a great challenge, this assumption of manufacturing employment being instigated by the attractiveness of ASEAN and its single economy. That's one big thing that's going to happen, which ASEAN must address. It must address, because the digital economy is upon us. And there's no ASEAN social and education policy document to address the needs of the digital economy to be fulfilled by ASEAN as a whole. I know Singapore's got its own policy, very strong, it works very well. Singapore's up there, but look at Myanmar, and look at the Philippines, or look at Indonesia, where are they? Now what happens to the small and medium enterprises as people start to use new technologies? They say, okay, put them onto the email platform, link them up on the supply chain of the big companies, therefore they can find the access for their products. But they will be competing against each other. They will be competing against mechanization, computerization, robotization. Do they have the access to finance to do so fast enough? Now, in some countries like Indonesia, employment in the SME sector, micro, small and medium enterprises, is over 90%. Now what happens if these guys are out of a job in a country which already has a high level of underemployment? Will Indonesia not say, oh, I don't care about ASEAN openness, opening mind. I have to protect my interests, I have to protect my employment, I've got to protect my people. So there are consequences, and that can then begin to rock the ASEAN script of integration and lowering down and assuming those three, making sure those three assumptions are fulfilled. So there is this challenge we must think about. Thirdly, if you say, oh no, but the digital economy will increase production, you become more efficient and more, yes, but look at the employment factor. Look at the manufacturing employment factor, the cost to manufacturing employment that may come about as a result of digitalization, and see how it affects the different economies, the different socio-economic system. If you do not do that, ASEAN will be sitting on a time bomb, a socio-economic time bomb, which could be explosive when people are out of work. We already have all sorts of other social political issues, coming at us, and then you have unemployment and economic deprivation at the same time. You might have a big problem. Then even to take advantage of digitization, the whole education system has to be changed. In Malaysia, we're talking so much about changing the education system. How long have we been talking about it? We do not encourage cognitive learning in our system. We don't like kids to argue, think laterally, and be argumentative, even with teachers and so on. But you need those kinds of basic argumentative skills to take on the digital economy. You have to analyze data. You have to actually visualize situations. One situation, again, like a data scientist. He has to be great. Let's say, like a manager, commercial manager scientist. Or let's say you are a virtual architect. Virtual architect, you've got to move things about, and we see different outcomes from different actors. So you have to have a society which is well invested in data and digital infrastructure. You've got to have a society which produces this kind of people, have a society which encourages innovation through greater access to finance, which reduces the cost of failure. You have to have a different kind of society from the one that we presently have. Are we up to it? Can we do it well enough? And that's just Malaysia. Myanmar, Indonesia, Philippines, where are they? So there are many challenges that are thrown up by the digitized economy. Now finally, you do ask me questions on specifics, finance and so on and so forth. But at this juncture, coming up to 20 minutes, at this juncture I'll do the macro strategic outlook. China. Now China is a rising power. It does not make them good or bad. They're a rising power. A rising power attracts relationships with China. A rising power also imposes relationships on others. It's quite a normal phenomenon. But as a result of China's rise, purely in economic terms, I'm not looking at geopolitical or security terms, purely in economic terms, different ASEAN countries are attracted to China in different ways. There's a different thickness, a different depth in the relationships with China. If you take mainland Southeast Asia alone, again, this is a very interesting study. The links to Yunnan and Gongji are very strong. So between Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, Vietnam, plus Thailand, CLMV plus T, you have a population with Yunnan and Gongji of 400 million people. You have a GDP of half of ASEAN. Okay? You have a growth rate above ASEAN's average. And these guys are linked north and south, west and east. We know of, I think, the 2,750 kilometer link from Maoleumin, Dawai and Da Nang. That's linking, there's a corridor. And then you have the north-south high-speed rail that's coming up from Kunming, down into Vientiane, and it's going to be linked. Thailand is building a second airport. They have a development corridor to the east of Bangkok, which is incorporated into their constitution to make sure, because they change government so often and so on and so forth, so the military authorities put this into the constitution, a 10-year development program. So you have a region which is dynamic on its own, a sub-region of ASEAN, different from the archipelagic part, and the linkages of this region with China are stronger than the archipelagic part, even as there will be links with China, of course, but that body of ASEAN, we talked about two-speed ASEAN. These are slower fellas, blah, 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 CLM, perhaps not V anymore, a two-speed ASEAN. We might have a two-part ASEAN. We have a two-part ASEAN. It's not good or bad, but let's accept the fact that the script on ASEAN integration may not happen. ASEAN integration may not happen according to script. It might be different from the script, because the rise of China brings up opportunities and challenges to different ASEAN countries in different ways. And so it is interesting, we talk about One Belt, One Road, and of course there are some political things and so on with the rise of China too, which tends to divide ASEAN. It's not China's motive necessarily to divide ASEAN, but the way the member states of ASEAN respond to China divides ASEAN anyway. So, to end, there are factors that can impact the great opportunities of an integrated ASEAN. Let's recognize them. Let's try to solve the best we can the more economic factors, or the three conditions to achieve growth, to achieve the size that we want, but also be mindful of the fact that the rise of China and digitization will impose challenges on our ASEAN economic integration script. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tan Sri. There you have it. One of our very own brilliant luminaries coming up with some really strong and powerful points there. I'm sure many of you have a lot of questions already in your minds, especially when it comes to key points that has been raised, such as the impact of digitization on our labor force, as well as the cost of doing business in ASEAN. We will get to have the opportunity to ask Tan Sri some questions later on in the session, but let me first move on to Mr. Ashwin, who will be sharing with us the best practices of investing in Selangor by Burley Chaka Company Limited, Thailand. Without further ado, Mr. Ashwin. Thank you.
It's been an honor to be sitting among the distinguished panelists and to be invited to speak to people here in Malaysia. I have 20 slides, but I hope that I'm not going to every page, because otherwise it's going to eat up all the other people's time. So just follow Tan Sri just now, just talk about 2 main slides. Before I'm sharing, I was asked to talk about the experiences and from private perspective, what we are expecting in terms of the government to facilitate our investment when we decide to invest abroad. So BJC, the company that I'm from today, actually belongs to Tan Sri Dr. Jaran Sirivathnaphakdi, who is also an entrepreneur by trade, by life. He actually founded many good companies in his own generation. And BJC was acquired by him from a Swiss firm, actually. It was established in 1882. And now we're celebrating our 135 years of establishment in Thailand. BJC is truly an ASEAN company because it has been one of the forefront in terms of setting up their own offices and operation in Southeast Asia. The company set up an office in Saigon and also in Yangon in 1940s. And then in the office in Yangon, unfortunately, have to be closed down because there was a change in regime. At that time, the management was asked to leave the country, and the company went back in Myanmar in 1990s. We also expanded into Vietnam in 1990s. At that time, when in 1990s, we set up a glass container plant near Ho Chi Minh City. But there was financial crisis in Thailand in 1997, so the management back then decided not to invest further in Vietnam. I joined the company in 2007. At that time, we still have limited exposure to Southeast Asia. We have identified Southeast Asia as our home country, looking through the history of BJC as a trading company, bringing in fine goods and products and services from abroad to Thailand since 135 years ago. We now have seen that as a good opportunity for us to be in Southeast Asia. So a lot of things that what we do since then, we expand our exposure in Vietnam. When I joined the BJC, Vietnam, we only have about less than 50 people. But now, during the course of a decade, we now expand to cover almost 10,000 people people in Vietnam. Grow top line less than 10 million US dollars to now more than 1 billion US dollars. From our investment abroad, the first country during my time is Malaysia. When we look at the different countries in Southeast Asia, Malaysia is a country that we first established outside Thailand during our time, because we love what we've seen, we love the legal framework, we love the transparency of the government, we love the continuity of the government, and also the clear rule of law. And also there are many great opportunities. Malaysia has a good combination in terms of many ways. It's cosmopolitan enough, it also has stable government, it has large customer base, and at the same time it can be gateway to Southeast Asia. So that's why when we first established, we acquired a snack food company in Cha Lam. So it's good to be back in Cha Lam. That's where and then after that, we also acquired Fraser & Neave, Maya glass product, which is one of the largest glass container manufacturer in Johor. So we have our base in Selangor and also have our base in Johor. And that led to the other part of the group acquire Fraser & Neave. We now become to our family in Thai. It's a Thai company here. So our investment in Malaysia was good. So there are many things that we do right now. So BJC now we have transformed ourselves into a regional player. What our operation cover from upstream, which is manufacturing. We have more than 20 manufacturing facilities across Southeast Asia. Glass container manufacturing in Thailand, and we acquired a glass container manufacturing plant in Johor and also in Saigon, Vietnam. We brought along joint venture partner from the U.S., Ball Corporation, and over Illinois, which is the largest packaging company from the U.S., to establish our network in Southeast Asia. We also manufacturing the consumer products, fast-moving consumer products, soap, snack food, tissue, paper. We now have a plant in Cambodia and also in Vietnam. So these are the things that we do. During the course of our development, we also found opportunity that in order to be successful in the future, we need to have a retail platform. So last year, the group BJC, we acquired Big C Supercenter, which is the hypermarket similar to Giant, similar to Tesco here in Thailand. We acquired from the French casino group for $6 billion at that time. And even before that, we acquired the German-based Metro Vietnam for about 655 million euros. So we expand our business across Southeast Asia now. That's where we have now. So now BJC at this point in time, we cover investment for the manufacturing, which we call upstream, for the distribution part, which is on the we call midstream, and also retail and wholesale, which is downstream. I will just go to another slide that's very important in terms of what when we enter in different markets, we always look for the four main things here. We first of all is a legal framework. Second of all is macroeconomic situation in that particular country. Thirdly is the business dynamic itself. And lastly, the people. So among these four factors, we believe that Malaysia is actually meet all the criteria, especially Selangor, which is one of the important states in Malaysia. On the legal framework, we have invested in Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Myanmar, and Malaysia. What we love most is the legal framework here. There's a clear rule of law. For example, there's a very excitement when we invested in Vietnam, and the law changed over the tax code. And when it's changed, it actually changed through the Vietnamese newspaper. So it's that we need to really understand the legal framework and implication. At that time, the change of law, the tax code in Vietnam, also make us reach the hiccup situation in Vietnam. It's also impact the way that we structure our acquisition transaction. But what we have found in Malaysia is different. It's very clear because there's a Bhumiputra, also legal framework that we need to have some kind of the local partner in here. But without that, we also can get the waiver from the government so that we can continue the business. So legal framework here in Malaysia is quite understandable, and also it's very clear and follow the Western way of doing it. Our challenges when we invest in Cambodia and Laos is also different. Because when we invest in Laos, what we found is actually the tax code can be subject to negotiation. The VAT exemption is actually depends on our ability to negotiate with the government. It's not clear. So that's also impact in the way that we set up, when we're going to establish whether we can import the products to sell in Laos or we're going to manufacture there. So that's the first thing. Secondly, the macroeconomics. This is also important. As Tan Sri mentioned, Southeast Asia has a very robust and very good prospect in terms of economic growth. And we now has been put in the limelight. That's why many investment from different players across different continents also looking at Southeast Asia. But inside, there's still a lot of diversity in the way that our macroeconomic situation is. Thailand, we still call where we are caught in the middle income trap, or maybe we still have to move up ante in order to become a developed country. Malaysia, Singapore is already developed country. Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam. Vietnam is actually a bigger brother in this Indo-China region, but at the same time still on the development process. Yeah. So macroeconomic situation in these 10 countries in Southeast Asia varies a lot. So when we invest, it's actually, even though sometimes we like to call Southeast Asia as a block and expect a more homogeneous type of economic condition, but actually it varies. Myanmar, in the past, from our experiences in the 1940s, 1990s, Myanmar is on a good transitional phase in order to become a more developing economy. But now, in the last couple of years, you also heard about the different story about the very high factor production, land, also because in order to get the land to open an office, in order to get the land, everything, the real estate prices have been increased tremendously.
In China, who has been very much involved in the One Belt, One Road initiative discussions. And after quite a couple of years of discussions into the One Belt, One Road initiative, he came to me and said, "Victor, I'm sorry, I got it wrong. I thought the One Belt, One Road, the road referred to the ancient Silk Road. As a matter of fact, it turned out to refer to the maritime Silk Road." So he got the belt and the road wrong. In China, most of us sometimes make the mistake of referring to either the belt or road, or the road and the belt. So the official version, in China at least, is the belt and the road, and the belt referred to the so-called Silk Road Development Zone, or the belt, which is on the land, and the road refers to the 21st century maritime Silk Road. And when we want to abbreviate that, we have different ways to abbreviate that. The One Belt, One Road in Chinese original is very poetic, is very romantic. It's One Belt, One Road, 一带一路. But when you translate that into the very pragmatic English term, it becomes One Belt, One Road, or more recently it's called the Belt and Road. it sounds like bed and breakfast, for example, or a milk and coffee, for example, or brick and mortar, etc. It doesn't trigger the big imagination of what exactly it's all about. I would say the One Belt, One Road initiative, if you try to really understand that in a more comprehensive way, is the first time and the unprecedented way of looking at economic development on a continental basis, at least. It started very much based on the Eurasian continent as a whole, but now it spills over into Africa, and as our distinguished panelist just showed a map of One Belt, One Road, with all due respect, allow me to make two small amendments to that map. It says China's One Belt, One Road. In reality, no country in the world can build the One Belt, One Road. So it's definitely not China's. It's a One Belt, One Road initiative for all the countries involved, for all the participating entities, including the corporates involved, because it will take all these resources available to build up the One Belt, One Road. Second, it's not just Eurasian anymore. It's just not the Horn of Africa or northern shore of the African continent. Let me give you one example. You know that China-US trade reaching about $600 billion is the largest single pair of bilateral trade in the world. And there is indeed a huge trade imbalance, about $350 billion in China's favor against the United States. So the United States is very much asking China to do something to achieve greater balance in the trade. Now, the discussions are very arduous, sometimes it's very painful, but I would say that probably the discussions will reach a tipping point very soon, in the sense that President Donald Trump has talked about building up or upgrading the infrastructure in the United States, spending about $1 trillion, but where is the money coming from? The United States really runs a huge budgetary deficit already, very much in debt. So I would say that in Beijing, I personally come across many American visitors who eagerly talk with their Chinese counterparts about raising money in China and mobilizing all the corporate resources to invest in upgrading the US infrastructure. So don't be surprised if one day there is a huge announcement about Chinese investments in helping the United States in upgrading the infrastructure. That, in a sense, is part of the One Belt, One Road initiative. Mainly because the One Belt, One Road initiative, in a larger macro and philosophical sense, is to look at economic development in a new way by building up connectivity, by focusing very much on infrastructure, and by enabling the countries, the corporates, the societies, the people, for example, to better achieve higher level of productivity, higher level of efficiency, so that they can charge a higher premium. They can sell their goods and services to far greater distance, to markets originally beyond their reach, and to really build up corporate connectivity and alliances better. So in this way, I would say the One Belt, One Road eventually will reach even to the United States. If we look at Canada, there is no doubt Canada recently joined the AIIB and is very eager to work on their connectivity from Alberta province, which is rich in oil and gas, to their Pacific coast. By building up pipelines and connectivities, there are problems to be overcome, of course. But I would say that the connectivity projects in Canada, linking their resources in Alberta, Saskatchewan to the Pacific coastline, is part of the great One Belt, One Road initiative. If we look at many Latin American countries, we are talking about helping these countries to build up railway connectivity from the Atlantic coast all the way across and above the Andes to reach the Pacific coast, so that the congestion point at the Panama Canal can be relieved and more goods can be sold to the Pacific part of the world with higher efficiency. And when we look at ASEAN, which is such a wonderful thing, I have called the ASEAN one of the greatest man-made achievements in human history. And many of you actually living within ASEAN, and you probably are too close to the great achievements of ASEAN. You cannot see the full magnitude of these achievements. But looking at ASEAN from Beijing, for example, where I'm based, and comparing ASEAN with many other parts of the world, and comparing that, for example, with other regional groupings, then you will realize that what you are doing is really a huge human endeavor, and has served the 10 ASEAN countries in such a wonderful way by avoiding war and conflict in this region, by enabling the countries to achieve a higher level of coherence and homogeneity, despite of probably one of the highest level of heterogeneity among the ASEAN countries in terms of religion, culture, economic background, and many other things. Therefore, I would say, when we look at One Belt, One Road, think of it as really an unprecedented human development paradigm, not looking at one country, not looking at one group of country, not looking at one region by itself, but looking on the continental basis, starting with Eurasia, spilling over into Africa, and now more and more connecting with North America and South America. Allow me also to use one example. Here in Malaysia, we know that relations between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Malaysia are very close. There is a lot of religious and cultural affinities between these two great countries. And you know, under the leadership of His Majesty the King and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince Mohammed, Saudi Arabia is promoting very much the Vision 2030. That is to reduce their dependence on oil and increase their industrialization by bringing in more manufacturing capacities. And amazingly, you know, I'm an advisor to Aramco, probably the largest corporates in the world. Amazingly, Saudi Arabia wants to turn itself into a major hub for One Belt, One Road. Why? Because I think our brothers and sisters in Saudi Arabia have come to the realization that their Vision 2030 overlaps with the goals and the aspirations and the objectives of the One Belt, One Road initiative very much. Because what if you really want to set up more manufacturing capacities in Saudi Arabia? Where do these capacities come from? Who can help? Who can provide financial support? Who can really relocate, for example, or start anew manufacturing capacities in Saudi Arabia against very incremental climate conditions, for example? And I think China and Saudi Arabia right now are working very closely to promote such synergy, to promote the interface of Vision 2030 of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia with the One Belt, One Road initiative, initiated and promoted by China, but to be shared by all the participating countries. Now, the One Belt, One Road map shows
the opportunities available with regard to the integration process. My second question is to Dr. Victor. Interestingly, your optimism is rightly said. A lot of interest about the BRI. I was recently in Pakistan attending some seminars on this, and there's a lot of excitement there as well. The BRI is going to places where nobody wants to touch. Nobody wants to go, and you are now opening up access to those regions. Now, you had a lot of optimism about Japan and the US finally joining the BRI community. But what do you think about India? India is having problems with the BRI as well, because India is claiming that you are building roads in an area claimed, occupied by Pakistan, but claimed by India. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ravi. Two very interesting questions. May I first maybe address for Tan Sri on the issues of awareness on ASEAN?
I think the level of awareness is actually not very high in ASEAN, about ASEAN. as you say, in Indonesia, my friend Dino Jalal, former President SBY's aide, told me, in his survey, he found less than 5% of the population in Indonesia knew about ASEAN. In Malaysia, it wasn't very high either, less than 50%. Hence, Mustafa Muhammad, Dr. Sri Mustafa Muhammad, decided to form an ASEAN circle to come up with ideas about how ASEAN could be better known. Now, my view is the problem of awareness of ASEAN is because it has been a very top-down process, and it's also been a very governmentally driven process. Unless the process is more broad-based, made more broad-based, and moves from down upwards, this is a problem that will remain. That is why I propose, after 50 years, if ASEAN is going to move forward in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it is important that we engage the young people in ASEAN to think about and speak out about what they want for ASEAN. I know Keng Yong mentioned an aging population. Actually, we only have a window of about 20 years in which, before we become an aging population. At the moment, 65% of the population, 60% of the population of ASEAN is under 35. Now we should engage these guys and find out from them what they want from ASEAN in the future, from their perspective, because it's their future, not ours, not mine. And we have not done so. In fact, some people still talk about having an eminent persons group to talk about what ASEAN should form and should take. I don't think this is the right way to go forward again. Ask the young, form an ASEAN Youth Consultative Council, not just on economy or entrepreneurship, about the structure, how decisions should be made, about education, about social policies, and so on. Get that input, then you have a more broad-based input into ASEAN. That's a more structural approach. The second part is to have more popular ways of making it familiarizing it with people. Take ASEAN food. You can have more stalls than just ASEAN food stalls at airports and so on. ASEAN clothes and fashion designers. We don't know that some of the top designers in ASEAN actually who they are. The Filipinos, the Indonesians are fantastic designers. I've seen shops, boutiques in Bahrain carrying designs by Indonesian designers, clothes, women's clothes that cost in the thousands of dollars, But do we know about this in ASEAN? About these designs, about the food? Maybe we can call it ASEAN satay instead of Malaysian satay and cause quarrels, between Malaysia and Indonesia. And there's so much commonality in food. There's so much commonality. So the popular things, we wanted an ASEAN business card to be incorporated, but one of the people who objected to it was Singapore on security grounds. Even the APAC business card has now been terminated, again on security grounds. So there's some pushback in some areas that would make it easier for ASEAN to be popularized. And you have to give it to AirAsia, for pushing the ASEAN idea, making it more broadly known and people traveling more freely in ASEAN. You got to give it to some of the financial institutions which have established presences in many parts of ASEAN, despite problems that they face, cost issues that remain, which we can discuss. So there are many things that can be done both on a structured basis, using youth as a foundation, and also on a popular basis, making ASEAN more real to people.
Thank you, Tan Sri. There you are. I hope that answers your question. And now to Dr. Gao on the role of India. But before anything else,
Thank you very much. I think you asked a very good question. Couple of points. First of all, China and India have the two largest populations in the world. Combining together, the population is about 2.6, 2.7 billion. So in that sense, war is not an option between China and India. Because if war breaks out between China and India, the two largest populations in the world, and both are nuclear armed, you're talking about calamity for mankind. So either because you want it, or by default, peace is the only way between China and India. So we need to draw inspiration from this conclusion. That's number one. Number two, don't forget, ever since 1962, no single shot has been fired by China or by India against each other. Therefore, despite of all the wranglings you sometimes come across in media, in particular, the two countries are, relatively speaking, very rational and very eager to control their own temper and avoid firing a shot at each other. Do you think China does not have too many shots, or India does not have too many shots? No, they have huge weapon storage, of course, but no single shot has been fired since 1962. It's not because Victor Gao was born in 1962, but because of something else, of course. That's another one. Now, number two is that you talked about Kashmir, which has a very complicated history, and indeed, Pakistan is now in possession of part of Kashmir, India is in possession of part of Kashmir. It's a very complicated history. And the CPEC, the China-Pakistani Economic Corridor, is a reality now. The Gwadar port is being built. I've actually flown above Gwadar port and its neighborhood quite a number of times. And I can see with my own eyes the expansion of the project, etc., etc. And the project will include huge connectivity projects, seaports, railway, highway, possibly also natural gas and crude oil connectivity, refineries, power generations, etc. Allegedly, it will reach about $48 billion US. Now, one thing of relevance to ASEAN, at a point, I would say, China was faced with a difficult choice, whether to spend that much of money to promote connectivity through Myanmar, or whether to spend that much money to promote connectivity through Pakistan. Eventually, for whatever reason, the choice was made, the decision was made to go along through Pakistan. Now, Pakistan-China relations are as good as you can expect between two countries. I would say, from India's perspective, there should not be reason to worry about these connectivity projects. We know there was an incident between China and India involving Donglong, and the Indian claim was that China was building a road all the way up to the peak of the mountain, which is the borderline between the two countries. China will continue to build these connectivities all the way to the border, and immediately after the resolution of that particular incident, the Deputy Prime Minister of Nepal visited China, and China and Nepal signed very big connectivity projects which will allow construction of railways across the Himalaya from China's Tibet all the way to Kathmandu and all the way down to the Nepal and Indian border. So this is happening, and I think Indian friends should use better imagination. Just imagine that railway connectivity from Nepal can be connected with India very, very easily and all the way down through the Indian plains, and it will help foster connectivity significantly. The power generated in China, in southern part of China, can be supplied to India, helping greater industrialization and manufacturing in India. So I would say that between China and India, peace should be the rule, and two countries need to embrace each other as friends rather than coming up with conspiracy theories or confrontation schemes. Cooperation is the better way going forward between China and India. Thank you.
thank you, Dr. Gao. So there you have it. Mr. Ravi, I hope that answers your two questions. Before, I've been told by the organizer we do have some 10 minutes left. but I think Mr. Aswin is rushing for his flight.
Yeah.
Yes? So can I just ask for one last question, maybe, just to be fair? Yeah? So any questions from the floor? I think I have some of my members there who wanted to ask on the sharing economy. Can I get one of my members, Akmal? On the sharing economy impact on ASEAN? Was there a question from you guys that you guys wanted to ask? I'd like to ask on behalf of my association members, if I may. Maybe this will open up to all three distinguished panelists. Right now, we were talking about the sharing economy on social enterprises and the impact of startups and entrepreneurship in ASEAN. Of course, we've heard, as Tan Sri has highlighted before, digitization will have significant impact, especially with the fourth industrial revolution. Can I just ask for one last opinion on what's in it for the young entrepreneurs who are out there trying to build new platforms in the name of innovation and wanting to build new problem-solving solutions? As we know, ASEAN is not short on problems, but how can us young entrepreneurs look into the sharing economy and how to leverage on that as well into the business opportunities in ASEAN? Sure. If I may, Mr. Aswin, may I just ask?
Entrepreneurship has always been there during the course of history in the past. I mean, our founding fathers, founding parents of the nation actually has been observing many entrepreneurial spirits have been cut across the continents. But now, I think during the new generation here, we found that there's better equipped with tools and technologies to allow them to actually reduce inefficiency in a way they can build a successful business model. But the key challenge here is that, especially in Southeast Asia, is how we can come up with a better ecosystem infrastructure that there's been not only the physical infrastructure, but at the same time the necessary infrastructure, the funding models, the way that they can capitalize on what they have in terms of addressing the unmet need in the societies as compare with what we have in Europe and in USA. So I think the key challenges here, I'm sure the entrepreneurial spirits in Southeast Asia is no different from what we have in the States or in Europe. But the key challenge here is how we can actually create different pieces in the economic system, ecosystem, so that to allow them to springboard to what they need.
Thank you, Mr. Ashwin. Dr. Gao, maybe any notes on entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I think I've been to Malaysia quite a few times, and I really have high appreciation for the younger generation in Malaysia. I see several shining points. I travel tremendously across the world, including to many Muslim countries. And I would say that in Malaysia, the empowerment of women, the education of women is a good example, not only for women here in Malaysia, but across the board for a much larger community in the world. I'm very much pained to see in certain countries, women are denied the right to be educated, and they were really, becoming another class in themselves. And I think Malaysia can really do a great deal now. Secondly, I would say in the world today, there is this tension, for example, between the so-called Western civilization or the Islamic civilization. But we know for sure that Islam is a peace-loving religion, and the Muslim people are loving peace. And how can you really come up with a way to convince yourselves, but also convince the rest of mankind that, for example, Malaysia is such a great country, is a shining example, and can really educate ourselves, but also educate the whole world. And eventually there will be better peace between different countries, between civilizations, different countries, etc. I think Malaysia and the people here, the younger generation here, can do a great deal. Now, allow me to add another point. I think when you travel to great aviation ports like Dubai or Qatar, which is now a little bit under pressure because of the political situations over there, or for example, when you travel to Singapore, for example, these places, they do not become international travel or transportation hub purely by themselves. there was a human intervention. Mr. Raffles discovered Singapore and led the way to turn Singapore into a great international transportation hub. And there were people who originally decided to promote aviation in Qatar, in Dubai, for example, and then eventually they benefited hugely. Now, for the younger generation here in Malaysia, I hope you will think about many things, but one thing you can think about is what you can do to single out one or two or three things in Malaysia which can really put Malaysia much more so on the global map, which can turn Malaysia into the hub, into the center, into the gravity center of something. And what is that something? Why Malaysia can do that and no other country can do? Either in terms of economic development model, we're talking about transformation of the world, transformation of mankind, happening as we speak. And what is that magic thing that Malaysia can do better than anyone else? And if you decide to do that, you become the center, you lead mankind, you lead the world going forward. There must be that magic thing. Probably it's yet to be discovered. Probably you need to stretch your imagination a little bit. And if you hit the jackpot, then people here, the younger generation in Malaysia, the great country of Malaysia, the great state of Selangor, all benefit. And we, in other countries, also benefit along with you.
Thank you, Dr. Kao. Tan Sri Phanan.
Well, the ASEAN theme this year, under the Philippines chairmanship, is inclusive growth, prosperity for all. Okay, ASEAN is prone to rhetoric, making all sorts of slogans and so on, but I've not seen such commitment as there is in the Philippines to realize this inclusive growth and shared prosperity by setting up structures wherein entrepreneurs, small companies can come on to the supply chain, having a mentorship program. They have a program called AMAN, which is going to be announced in November, ASEAN Mentorship Entrepreneurship Network, so that big companies allow small companies, young entrepreneurs to come on to their supply chain and supply to them so that these guys get access to markets. Perhaps Chinese companies, big Chinese companies, can do the same for small ASEAN entrepreneurs and SMEs, to clamber on to the Chinese supply chain that goes up. There's one way China can concretely do something in terms of inclusive growth, because there are many big Chinese companies now. For example, Alibaba should not take over the whole of the ecosystem in terms of the trade flows by using just its own platforms, but it should be using platforms, additive platforms from the other smaller companies in ASEAN, to bring them onto this platform and that they can also, grow. That's one way, to bring them in. But most of all, these small companies need finance. Their main problem has been access to finance. Everything they want to do, become more sophisticated, do market research, depends on access to finance. The access to finance, if this issue is not addressed, everything else will not happen. And this is an issue where ASEAN leaders, and especially ministers of finance, governors and so on, should be more liberal about in terms of the e-finance platforms and allowing e-finance to cut across borders to give finance to companies that are growing. For example, if I can only enjoy 3%, 4% in Malaysia, and I have money, and I can enjoy 10% in the Philippines, at greater risk with no guarantee on my deposit, but I'm willing to take that greater risk, I should be able to lend money at the retail level to a Filipino company. And this sort of thing should be allowed. They should be, of course they're afraid of capital account flows and so on, but you can manage it. You can see when it reaches a certain level, you want to calm it down, you do so. But we have to provide finance for the companies so that they can be inclusive and they get a chance to grow.
Thank you, Tan Sri. Can I have one last round of applause for the panelists in such an insightful session?